Security in Europe and support for Ukraine are the key issues on the agenda for U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's tour of European countries. He has already visited the headquarters of the U.S. European and Africa Commands in Germany. He is also set to participate in a meeting of NATO defense ministers and a session of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format.
According to Pentagon officials, Hegseth is expected to push for U.S. allies in Europe to increase their defense spending and take a more active role in addressing the challenges facing Europe. He is also likely to reiterate President Donald Trump's call for a diplomatic resolution to the war between Russia and Ukraine. From the Voice of America publication.
President Trump has strongly criticized European countries for chronically underfunding their security. He has warned that the US could leave NATO if alliance members fail to meet the mandatory contribution of 2% of GDP. Trump's administration also holds the position that Europe should take greater responsibility for ending the war in Ukraine and maintaining peace afterward. We will have our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Vice President in Europe this week, talking through the details of how to end this war. The underlying principle here is that Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it, and in terms of security guarantees, it is squarely going to be with the Europeans. Meanwhile, Washington has paused the development of its plan for ending the war in Ukraine to consult with European nations and give them a seat at the negotiating table. The Telegraph, citing sources, reports that U.S. Special Envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Kate Kellogg, will present fragments of Trump's plan at the Munich Security Conference. According to Reuters, Kellogg will also use the event to encourage European nations to increase their purchases of American weaponry.
It is one of several ideas the administration is discussing to potentially continue U.S. weapons shipments to Kyiv without expending significant U.S. capital. The Trump White House would likely face significant pushback from some Republicans if it moves forward with asking for additional funding from Congress. Administration officials view an arms purchase deal with Europe as a potential workaround, allowing Washington to support Kyiv without spending U.S. taxpayer dollars. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said last month that Europe would pay for U.S. arms for Ukraine. From the Reuters publication.
Earlier, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte stated that European countries are prepared to purchase more American weapons and supply them to Ukraine. Additionally, the EU has recently been reassessing its defense strategy. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that Brussels will unveil a new policy document, the White Paper of the Future of European Defense, in mid-March.
That we need an EU-wide surge in defense. Modern warfare requires scale, technology and coordination, too big for any one nation to handle alone, and this is where European cooperation delivers. We will need funding, both public and private. We discussed that in the European Council at the beginning of the week. We will need more cooperation for better interoperability and lower costs, simpler legislation, more innovation and more return on investment as the world is changing fast. Our long-time ally, the United States, has set a new agenda. Europe is prepared for a robust but constructive dialogue with the United States.
According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, ensuring Ukraine's security in the post-war period will require support from both Europe and the US. In an interview with The Guardian, he cited the US-supplied Patriot air defense systems as a crucial element in protecting Ukraine from all types of missile threats. Zelenskyy also expressed support for French President Emmanuel Macron's initiative to deploy a European military contingent to Ukraine after the end of hostilities, provided the force reaches a strength of 100,000 to 150,000 troops. Reported by Serhiy Kulias, Andriy Dmytrenko, UATV News.
Europe must show no weakness towards Russia. The future defense spending quota of NATO countries will be much higher than 2% of gross domestic product, Alliance Chief Mark Rutte said. He supported Donald Trump's position on the need to increase military investment in the bloc's countries. In particular, Rutte believes Germany should spend more and produce more, and that will be the subject of debate in many European countries in the coming months.
Trump was generally right with this demand during his last term as president. And thanks to that demand, we have invested more, but we need to invest even more. And in the coming months, allies will decide exactly how we will measure that. But I can assure you of one thing. It will be much more than 2%. Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, in an interview with Bild.
After his inauguration, U.S. President Donald Trump said he plans to ask NATO to spend 5% of gross domestic product on defense instead of the current 2%. In 2024, 24 out of 31 NATO countries spent at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Some states, such as the Baltic states and Poland, supported Trump's demand. Others, such as Germany, called 5% of gross domestic product unreachable.
Until I came along, we were paying almost 100% of NATO only to get bad trade deals. And now it's been evened out, but very unfair it was evened out pretty good. Actually, I did a good job. They paid $440 billion if you look at the Secretary General's report, and he was here recently and he said that. He said one of the most amazing things I've ever seen is what President Trump was able to do with these countries of Europe, of which he was in charge of them, but he couldn't get them to pay. I went over, I said, you got to pay, and if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. It's very simple.
The White House administration intends to put pressure on European NATO allies to increase their defense spending. The New York Post quoted U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz as saying that the U.S. will also spend the same amount.
With the largest conflict since World War II on the horizon, it is time for Europe to demonstrate its commitment to our alliance by increasing spending to at least 5% of GDP. We will continue to have direct and candid conversations to push NATO members to take on their fair share of the burden. Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, for the New York Post.
Pause. Currently, U.S. spending on NATO is 3 800% of gross domestic product. To reach the 5% threshold, the U.S. would have to commit more than $600 billion in additional funding, writes the New York Post. Lithuania and Estonia have already agreed to increase spending in 2025, Financial Times reported. President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, is confident that all European NATO countries will agree on a decision to increase defense spending at the alliance's June summit in The Hague, reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.